All right, so thank you for coming. Again, most of you know me by now, Dr. Julie Hayden, a little bit of my background, but licensed psychologist. I do work at Genesis Recovery on Fridays and very much enjoy that. Work with addictions quite a bit and other types of crisis situations that seem to go hand in hand. I've worked with a lot of chronic mental illness, so schizophrenia, bipolar, depression with suicide attempts, and with the context here, just extreme cases, domestic violence, addictions, which could range, and what that looks like, and it takes a toll on the family. And so we will have some good information that would be if somebody's stuck in an addiction, because you may be the one that shares that, but it will really be focused on how you manage this in a family. Also, just another connection with PTSD's difficulty in San Diego with combat stress, but also PTSD from trauma. And those types of settings tends to be also connected with addictions. It's interesting with PTSD, with combat stress, so addiction, alcohol obviously is very high, but other types of drug, and also addiction to pornography and prostitution and stripper clubs and things like that, that there's this aspect of addiction that comes with it, trying basically to make certain types of emotions disappear. And they need the intensity. It's got to be a lot higher than an average person to get that to disappear because of where they're coming from and what they've experienced. So a lot of things connect with addictions and take a toll on a family. So we'll talk about that. All right, so we'll get started here. I guess I'll have to move. I move when I present, so I'd like to sit and take a break, but I won't. I'll move around. If this is in your way, I can move it too. Okay. All right, let's get started. First of all, you might not be able to see these on this wall too clearly, but it's just pictures to spark your mind on what you might think of when you think of addictions. Okay, so since they don't show up, might as well switch to the words, but addictions might be addictions to drugs. You've got heroin, meth, cocaine, marijuana, obviously very popular. Alcohol. You could be addicted to food. Shh, don't tell anybody. You can be addicted to food. You can be addicted to sex, to gambling, to exercise, to pornography, social media. Some of these we don't like to count in addictions, but they're there. Sports, ministry. You could be addicted to ministry. So addictions can be very broad. If it's taking over your life, if it's something that you can't stop, if it's something that you have a lot of negative consequences coming towards you, and yet you continue it no matter what, if it is separating and disengaging you from your family, you might have an addiction. So addictions can be very broad, and that's important. In our context today, what takes a toll on family a lot of times are the drugs and alcohol and some of those types of addiction. But really, it's very broad. I want you to just picture what you think of with mental health struggles. This is difficult in the Christian community because a lot of times we don't give it credit. We don't see depression as a real thing sometimes. Oh, well, you need to have faith. It is spiritual. We know this. Broadly, it is spiritual. At the same time, there is chemicals involved, and there's a lot of complexity to it more than just saying that they should have faith. It can really be difficult. Somebody might be so depressed they're not going to get out of bed. They might be so depressed they want to end their life. So it's significant. You can have, I'll just switch to your list here. Bipolar, which would be something where they have severe depression, and also manics, where they're on top of the world, which sounds great, and it is for the person experiencing it, but there may be consequences where maybe they're acting out in very risky sexual behavior because they can't be harmed because they're close to being God and they're fantastic and everything's wonderful, and they have these extreme behaviors that come from it. Maybe they spend all their money. That can be tied to gambling, because they're amazing and wonderful, so they're going to win at everything. And with that manic side can come a lot of negative consequences to a family. People just struggle with anxiety, and all these have a continuum. I think we all struggle with some of this stuff to some extent, but there's extremes where it really debilitates and it becomes a problem in the family, where it's frustration and it's a pattern and it doesn't seem like you can do anything about it. Schizophrenia, you may have somebody who hears things or sees things that are not there, and this can impact a family. It could be a lot of stress on kids if they don't understand the context of it. They don't know why some things are happening, or maybe a parent is reacting in a certain way because of these backgrounds, but the kid doesn't know that. They just know their parents yelling at them or their parents angry at them. So in context, it can be very difficult trauma on the kid, even though there's not even poor motives. The parent might be trying to do it the best they can. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, is an example of a struggle that could really be hard on a family. If there's an intensity to what the house has to look like and how things have to be in order, it's going to be very difficult in that family to play. The kids are playing on the, and that may seem silly, but it's stress, and it really does negatively impact the family. I'm just going to tell you, I've had little ones, so she's not going to bother me, and I don't know if she will you guys, but hopefully you tune it out so you guys can feel comfortable and just be here. I wouldn't say go for it maybe,
Yeah,
but
I was expecting
other than that, Yes, carpet, yeah, I didn't even think about that one. So, Jack, would you mind? It is great to have that breeze. I don't want to feel trapped. Yeah. Okay, so I want you to think through some of the impacts that addiction and mental health can have on families. Wow, it doesn't want to open.
We'll get it.
Well, all right, I'll let you play with it. If it's really a pain, we can see if maybe Jean can run and grab somebody that belongs at the church that would know why. Oh. Or break it, either way.
We still have pieces.
All right. Okay. Let's see what. Okay. So the impact on families. It can produce difficult and intense relationships. Okay? So amongst parents and children, amongst spouses. I've had some people I've worked with that, their spouse has some significant disorder of some sort, and it creates difficulty all the time. And they're gracious, they love the person, they fell in love with the person, they're going to be with them. It doesn't mean their life's not hard, and it's very intense and exhausting. And depending on if there's kids, maybe they're watching carefully, and they just have to have a better attuning into what's happening because of this factor in their family. For example, there's some disorders that a person can function very well on medication, and if they went off the medication, it's a whole new person you have to deal with. Kind of like somebody who struggled with alcohol, they might be one person, and then when they've been drinking too much, they become another person, and so the consequences are there, and it can be extremely difficult and intense. There's a lot of both mental health problems and addictions that people describe as roller coasters. And they describe, it's good today, it's bad. And on children, think of the impact of that, not knowing which parent am I going to have when I walk in the door today? What can I expect today? There's physical, emotional, and financial expense. You will physically your body will take a toll if you're dealing with addiction or mental illness in your family. Somebody said, whatever's happening now, one day your body will give you a bill. I like that phrase, okay? And so, sometimes in the moment when it's very intense, we can handle it. We get our body pumped full of adrenaline and we're okay. And then when that subsides, maybe the kid, is an adult and moves out, then all of a sudden our body, we feel it. We know we just went through a war and we barely made it out. So it takes a toll on your body. It takes a toll on your emotions and finances. Depending on what's happening, maybe you've had to bail this person out financially many times. Maybe there's people that have chosen to stay in relationships because they want to stay, they don't want a divorce. And what that's meant is several times of losing their house, losing all their money because of how the person has gambled or what they've done to have that money disappear. So this is a huge expense on a family. Stress and trauma, and the reason why I put trauma with stress is stress can be trauma. So we know now the impact on the brain and the body is pretty significant if somebody goes through trauma, and it has to do with the chemicals that are released in our body. They're there for good reasons, but first, when you have a stress or fear or rage, these strong emotions, the first thing that comes into our body is adrenaline, and that's the fun part. And adrenaline can be very good and useful. I always use the example of moms picking up cars because their kids are in danger. That's adrenaline. It's a fantastic resource to us when our life's in danger. But when our stress response continues, we have cortisol. And just very briefly, to save time for more later, cortisol does physically damage your body and can damage brain development of children. So the chronic stress can have an impact, even though you don't see something tangibly happening bad. It can impact kids in a negative way. So trauma, that whether it's actual trauma where there's abuse, or some things it's not as specific as that. Maybe a little kid watched a car accident. There's some things you cannot avoid in life. It doesn't mean it's not going to have an impact on their brain and on their stress level. So some of the things that come to the lives of kids you can't control, and it is producing that stress and that trauma. The long-term stress, if it continues, is where that true damage is that could impact brain development and later impact factors of mental health and impact factors of relationships, building connections with relationships, impact whether they can get a job and keep a job. These things that we didn't connect before, we see are ramifications of childhood trauma. And this was out of a particular study that Kaiser did, because a lot of times people do studies and they're like, the prison population, and it's like teenagers stuck, in this group home that we can test. Kaiser did this study, and it was very useful to us for good information, because it was asking every single person that came in. So unhealthy, healthy, didn't matter. Every single person came in, they asked to take the survey. And so the information they got was better than most research, because we could presume it's more characteristic of an average person, average population. And what they found is there is significant correlation with past trauma, whether it's actual abuse or emotional abuse, stress, basically, that stress response in our body that we're talking about, cortisol, that's connected to about 24 factors. And there's too many to list here, but that stress impacts how you're going to function as an adult. Of course, there's hope, and we see people all the time that have gone through terrible things and are healthy as adults, but just to recognize the consequence that may come, that you can come out and be strong and a survivor and a thriver in your life, but you know that there's consequences to your childhood and to how your parents were. So to flip that around, you as parents, to remember how important that is with your kids. And we have brokenness and repeated patterns. So unfortunately, the easiest thing is to repeat a pattern. And you try so hard not to be your mom, and then you just say it, and I am my mom. How did that happen? So, sometimes we copy our parents and everything's good. I have good parents, so for the most part, if I'm copying, I'm going to be okay. But there's a lot of situations where we repeat the pattern and it's not what's best for our family, but it's going to be what's easiest. So there's patterns in how you connect emotionally. There's patterns in your communication. I remember one lady that we were talking about, because they would get in violent screaming matches, and then we're talking about the impact on the kids, and it just clicked, and she's like, you mean this is not how people normally argue? And they're yelling, screaming. That's negative. She had no idea, because it's what she always experienced. It's easy to repeat patterns. So it would take awareness, something showing you a good, healthy way to be in a family, that you may be continuing a negative pattern that's having an impact and you don't even know. So that we repeat patterns. So if today you wanted to stop the cycle, you would have to be the one. There has to be a point where somebody decides, it ends with us. I don't care what generations have done before me. This is going to end. And abuse is a huge one. And abuse is a huge reason for addictions and mental illness. If you want to talk about risk factors for addiction and mental illness, abuse in childhood is top of your list. And then inability to have good, healthy coping skills, and then current stress. So obviously, when I'm talking, I'm using the lingo of a psychologist, but I know I've watched in people's lives how having a relationship with Christ, their whole life is different because they have the power of the Holy Spirit inside them. There's nothing that can compare to that. So I'm going to take it with that foundation that I know as a truth for me from my scripture, that number one tool for anybody is have a relationship with Christ so you have the power of the Holy Spirit inside you. And then I want to take today, for you to say, here, take this hammer to go hammer, take that screwdriver to go screw drive, I want you to have tools that work for different settings. So I want to add those to your bucket, to your toolbox, but I already do know that the first is that relationship with Christ. So here's our question. As Christians, what do we think? If we're dealing with addiction, which is just everywhere, we're in Lakeside. If you didn't know, there's addiction in Lakeside, just if you wondered. So addictions, mental health struggles, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, these types of things. Is it sin? Is it brain disease? Okay. Well, I have a disease, so I'm an alcoholic. I can't do anything about it because it's genetic. I was born this way as an alcoholic and I have to drink. Is it a brain disease or is it learned behavior? My grandpa drank, my dad drank, I'm drinking. This is what we've always done. Okay? Is it a learned behavior that you watch? So, yes. Does that help? Your answer is yes. All of it. Okay? We're going to look at it in more depth here. First of all, yes, it's sin. But it's not always an individual sin. If a person is doing something that's negative for their body, in 1 Corinthians we learn that our body is the temple of God and we're to take care of it because it belongs to Him. He paid a price. It's not our body anymore. So there's an aspect that sure, if you're using drugs and it's harmful to your body, that is probably an individual sin. But it's bigger than that. Adam sinned and we have a sin nature inside us. We have a push inside us to push us to sin. Right? So it's the easiest thing to be addicted to something. It's an easy thing to do what we're not supposed to do. Even Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, had this struggle where he said, what I want to do, I can't do. What I don't want to do, I do. And I can't figure this out. And he doesn't even give us an answer. He just goes, bless the Lord. So at the end, he's just like, thank God. Because he doesn't even have an answer necessarily. He knows he's in a battle. And he's just got to stay active in that battle. So our world is cursed in general. The world is falling apart. And it's still beautiful. It's still amazing. And it's falling apart. And we know this when we look at our society. Our bodies are cursed. So we will look at biology. But the reason why chemicals are messed up, or people have a different prefrontal cortex in their brain that make it easier to be addicted. The reason why all this, where we have diabetes and heart attacks and disease, is because in general, our bodies are cursed. And they're getting worse. And we have the sin nature we talked about. And Satan is attacking. He's a real person. I say, he's not the red guy on the shoulder, but I do see that it does feel like you got two options. You're following the Holy Spirit or Satan. Truth or a lie. And that helps me every day. Where am I walking? Am I walking in truth? Because I might say, am I walking in a lie? No, I'm not walking in a lie. But when I say, am I walking with the truth? So I must be walking in a lie. So it is helpful to kind of have those two roads. But Satan is real. He would love to destroy families. He would love to disengage you from being effective. Okay? Just throwing this out, PTSD. So now we take the elite of our society in war and we disengage them from their families. How great is that for Satan? They're stuck in an addiction. Their wife's afraid of them. They can't play with their kids. That's exactly what he wants. So there's some, we got to know out there that there's things that we see that we just let go right. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, it's a terrible problem in our society. No, we're in a war. He is real and he is not red or a cartoon. He's beautiful and he knows how to deceive very well. He will look very close to truth and not be truth. And so how he comes in addictions especially, if I were to tell you drugs are terrible and then you went and used drugs, you may think I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm talking about because they're fantastic. They're great. So not to deceive people that Satan is taking what God would want and he's just altering it enough to get you captured, to get you trapped and disengaged from protecting your family. Biology. Yes, it's biology too. For example, dopamine. And that would, you can have dopamine flood your body and brain and feel fantastic with drugs like heroin is very similar as what it would be if your body was flooded with dopamine. But also, gambling, when you do kind of extreme sports, that intensity that rushes you. There's other behavioral addictions that dopamine is flooded in your body and your brain, and that's a fantastic feeling, and it mimics a drug. And you can be addicted just as easily to a behavior because you're addicted to your own brain chemistry. And that's important to know because sometimes we discount. It's like, well, yeah, why are you addicted to sex? Oh, and then it could be a joke. No, it's serious. That there's that intensity that's flooding your brain with adrenaline and dopamine, and it's mimicking just what a drug would do, as if you're addicted to crystal meth or something. So you've got to know how powerful that is. And then some people do seem to have a sensitivity to the neurotransmitter. So there's two factors that could be where they're sensitive to it. And so in any kind of drug, you're taking it. Maybe somebody takes a drug and they don't even get very high. They're probably not going to be addicted. Somebody's sensitive to that drug and they get high, the chances of them being addicted are increased significantly. Okay? If you take something and it works quickly and it's fantastic, get ready. That's a recipe for being addicted relatively quickly. If it takes a while for you to get that high, it's less likely for you to be addicted. So there's a sensitivity that this is where biology and genetics could play a factor. It does not mean your genes made you drink or made you use drugs, but you could be sensitive. And you could call this an addictive personality, but it tends to be that person stopped that and they're moving over to there. And so that first they were a drug addict of some sort and maybe an alcoholic, but now they're a workaholic and now they're a exerciseaholic, and they just move because there's a sensitivity to that neurotransmitter that they're going to need to increase that. They want it and it's going to be hard for them to not have it, so they're going to move from one to the next. And that's very difficult. I've not seen that end with no more struggles of addiction. I've seen it, okay, we're funneling this to good. It's like, yes, it's unhealthy that you're exercising that much. It's too far, but go for it. It's like, it seems to be a struggle sometimes that it's just going to disappear, but that they're going to always be in a battle, always be in a struggle of some form of addiction. So you might be channeling it to something good rather than seeing it disappear. Okay? And yes, it can be learned behavior. The easiest way for us to learn is to watch what others have done that were significant in our life. If our parent was an alcoholic, it's going to be easy for us to mimic that. If you want your kids to be a certain way, you have to be that. Your kids will turn into you. It doesn't mean they won't also go on a tangent, but that's the most powerful way to teach, is to model. And that gives us hope too if our kids go on a tangent, because we know deep inside they've seen that model and they will probably come back. It seems like there's maybe 16, 17, and then 23, you get them back. And that is a pattern. So that is hope, at least, that combination. I'll tell you just a freebie here. The prefrontal cortex in front, it gives you the ability to control your impulses, and it helps you see the consequences of your behavior, higher level thinking. It's not fully developed until about 22 or 23. Now this is a change, it's interesting, but puberty starting earlier and the stretch of how long adolescence goes till is later. So I don't necessarily know the cause, don't get me on my guesses, but whatever the case, their prefrontal cortex is not developed until much later. So you can't give that as an excuse, but it is a difficulty that they're flooded with hormones, and the part of their brain that would help them see consequences and stop stupid things is not fully developed. So that's a difficult time, and that's why it's such a hard time frame for people of that age with addictions and other type of behaviors. So good to know in the back of your mind that when you're looking for hope, positive and negative reinforcement, if there's good that comes from using drugs or drinking or whatever the addiction may be, and even in depression. Let's go on a tangent for a second. There's positives to having depression. Now, if you have depression, you'll be irritated at me right now, but there's an aspect where if you don't look at the good that you're getting out of something, along with how much you hate something and how it's destroying your life, then you're going to be trapped. Because I guarantee you there's something good that's coming out of it. So you want to be real. You want to really look at, what do I gain out of this? And I'll give you myself as an example. There's been times in my life where I've been frustrated, and as a woman, I just want people to know how I feel. So, dealing with my husband, I just want him to know, I just want to whine and just lay it all out, and I want him to say, oh, poor thing. But instead, he's like, you need to suck it up. And before I slap him, that's the domestic violence one. Before I slap him, I thought, like, oh, man, he's right. This is a silly example, but go with it for a moment. I knew in that moment I didn't have to go down the road of pity party. I didn't have to let myself sink in. I could try to see it from a different perspective, but I wanted to go down there. I wanted to be miserable for 10 minutes, for goodness sake, but, he didn't give me that. But I appreciated it later. First I was irritated, and then I thought, you know what? Let's try this. Let's not go down there and see how the day goes. So all that to say is, what if there is something good that you're getting from it? OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I am not going to judge a person. I will not do that. I've had my own struggles with things, and I'm not ready to judge. But look at it for a moment. There is a refreshing time. It's just a half a second, if that. But when you follow through on the obsession, it feels good. And you want to do it again. And it feels awful to not do what that obsession is. You would have to be miserable for a time if you were ever going to stop that. And so to recognize the good that's coming is important, because it is reinforcing the behavior. If there's good, it's going to reinforce it. You're going to want to do it again because you're going to get that reward. For addictions especially, escaping negative feelings. Our society says we should just be happy, and our biblical worldview says sometimes you have suffering and pain. But I've had a lot of people that, I would consider very tough, just strong people. And if their kid was in danger, they had no problem chopping off their arm and cataract. What is it called? Yeah. If I say that, I'd be, yes, of course I would, and I believe they would. But then you say, okay, I want you to stop using this drug, and you're going to feel terrible for about a month. And they're just like, no, I can't do that. You have to put it in that perspective. That, yes, you're going to feel terrible for a time, but that's okay. It'll be worth it in the end. You don't have, this is something else I've said, and you can use this. I hope anything I teach you, you're thinking of how you're going to say it back to others that need this. What if, because anxiety is a big deal, okay? Just flooded head to toe with I want to jump out of my body. It's awful. Maybe your mind's going 1,000 miles an hour, and I don't know what those thoughts are. And if you just drank enough, it would all disappear. Or if you just use heroin just one moment, it would all disappear. And you know that. It's worked before. Say you're flooded with that anxiety, head to toe. It's just intense. It's awful. And I trapped you somewhere for 10 minutes straight, and you couldn't escape. You had to feel that intensity in your body for 10 minutes straight. Do you know what would happen? Nothing. And that's hard when I say that to them. Like, what are you talking? Because they're thinking and even the answers will be like, well, I couldn't handle it. I have to go use, or I have to run. I don't know. I wouldn't make it. They have an answer that actually has no content to it because nothing would happen. They would just be miserable for 10 minutes. So to wrap their head around that that's okay is very difficult, but very important. It's okay for you to feel miserable. There'll be a better result because it wouldn't last forever. Some drugs, if you have had it, it will be off a lot longer than others. But there would be a time that you would get past that, and the feeling would get better. Gone? Alright. Did you press any buttons?
I haven't touched it.
I meant go ahead. Oh, okay. Let's see. If you have no movement, sometimes it does that. Seems like that wasn't me. What are you talking about? Let's see. Alright. I have an idea. I'm going to trick it. Display. I have to talk out loud, guys, so bear with me here. Connect to display. And resolution extend. And duplicate. Okay. Changes. told you guys one now. Okay, so let's look at some lies real quick. See if you can recognize any of these. Okay, so you've got a family member with an addiction or mental illness. Okay, here's some lies you could tell yourself. Okay? I have to hold the responsibility for their feelings and behaviors on my shoulders. If they're feeling sad, if they're feeling happy, it's on me. Okay? I will take responsibility for what they just did to that person, for the money they stole, for whatever. You're going to take responsibility on your shoulders. Things will likely get better if I rescue them now. I'm going to go ahead and bail them out and rescue them now because they're probably going to get better pretty soon. How about this one? I deserve to be miserable. This is not a message you think you're telling yourself, but you may be. So see if it resonates with you. That when that person is causing chaos, causing difficulty in your family, sometimes from our background or other things in our life, we have a message that says, this is what I deserve, so I'm going to suck it up and deal with it. I will get more love or attention if I'm in the victim role. Okay? Are you a victim? Do you rescue? Are you the persecutor? Think about what role you play, and some people would rather stay in that victim role. This is not something you think consciously, like, hey, I'm going to be a victim today. It's something that happens. It's a message there. You're not aware of it, but it is there. That you're getting more attention, more love. Think of a kid. Kids do this. They're getting in trouble because they want their parents' attention. We don't purposely do this, but it happens. So think about if this is you. It's my fault. There may be no tangible evidence of that, but we blame ourselves often. The only option is to do what they ask. We don't even think about the option of not doing what they're asking. I will be mean or unloving if I deny them help. Sometimes Christians struggle with this because you should be loving, you should be caring, you should be help. Remember, if somebody wants your coat, you give them everything you have. You know, there's concepts in scriptures that are principles that if we apply it to something like this, we may struggle and think, where are the boundaries? Okay? God says, forgive and forget, so I should give him another chance. This time it'll be different. There is one thing, patterns are patterns. So if somebody's in an addiction and they have promised you now they're going to change and this time will be different, it's okay to have time to prove that. It's okay to still love them and require some kind of a time as evidence because it's more likely they'll continue in the addiction. It's very difficult to stop in an addiction. They have to be ready, and we can talk about what that looks like. Okay, so interventions. So these are some strategies I like to teach you can use. And I say Jesus style because he was always like this. So do you notice, you remember if you ever read Jesus and how he interacted with people when he was on earth, they would be trying to get him. You know, they have some question that's trying to make sure to show everybody he's, you know, this terrible person. And so they would ask him a question, and would he ever answer? He wouldn't. He'd go, let me ask you a question. And every time, you know, he would never come directly. He'd ask them a fueled question that would trap them. The example of the woman, that adulteress, they were going to stone her, and everybody's there, and they're like, Jesus, you know, what would you do? And then he picks up a stone and he says, whoever is without sin casts the first stone. Dun, dun, dun. And everybody left. Okay, that's Jesus style. So psychology stole it. Okay, we do that. So motivational interviewing is the idea, first of all, that there's no point in helping a person that doesn't need help, that doesn't want help. They don't see they have a problem. And so it's more focused on getting them to see the negative effects of what they're doing and the damage, so they have motivation in themselves to move in the direction of health. That's foundational.
When they're younger and they're not at that 22, 23 year age, can they rationalize that even though, can they see that they're creating these problems? You were saying earlier, they don't see the rationale, the consequences for what they're doing. Do they see, even though they see the consequences in reality, does it click?
No. And every kid's different. There's some that it does. But there's a lot that it doesn't. It doesn't mean they can't. It's just, in my opinion, it just means it's going to be more difficult. For anything I teach, I want to say there's just no hope. How about 30 years ago, are teenagers going to know consequences? Yes. There's something about the development and the culture of today that, our 16, 17-year-olds are not the same as they were 30 years ago. I don't know if I can pinpoint that exactly, but I know you're going to be in a battle that it's not going to connect the same. They're not going to care. And so honestly, I've got to say, there's two sides to that I'll just say real quick, is caring more about the relationship with God, because that's your true hope, that they care what God thinks about them more than the actual consequences. And then over here, have the boundaries, because they're not going to put them up. I think parents are nervous to put boundaries up, and for good reason, because you might lose them. They might run away. They might say, never mind. But it's still, they're not going to put the boundaries naturally most of the time. So you would have to have them there. And there's the hard part about that is this is dynamic, always changing. So I'll give you principles, but it's a very difficult situation when you're dealing with that age, because they're just not going to care. In any parenting, I'll talk about leverage. If there's something they care about, you have leverage, and you have some ability to impact them. But when they get to a certain age where there is nothing you have left that they care, that apathy, that's so difficult, because how do you manage what's going to keep them with you? You may lose leverage. So in those times, I'm going to give you more tools that you might be able to use. But I think there's at least that hope that what I have seen is that they do come back. That they can see it eventually, but it's not always as fast as we want them to see it. So at least there's hope, but hopefully sooner than later. But I'll show you some more and see if some of it helps.
Well, you've been helpful, because another psychologist I talked to said that age was 25 before the brain fully developed.
So you got 2
and
years.
You said it's 22 or 23. So I just kicked my 17-year-old son out of my house 2 weeks ago, which I guess I drew those lines. I don't know, but that's the motivation of my question.
Yep, and boundaries is where we're going to go. So we'll talk about that too, because you do have to have them. But motivational interviewing. So there are a lot of consequences that come from behaviors. So if you're dealing with addiction, it's easy. You got a DUI, it cost $4,000, you lost your car, you lost your driver's license, you lost your family, you're going to lose custody of your kids, you lost your home, you lost your job. There's a lot of consequences you can identify. There's also consequences of behaviors in different mental health disorders. If you're manic and you are naked running around on the street, you might go to jail. And there's a lot of compassion there. There's chemicals involved that are a part of that, but it's still behaviors that you have to have the consequence for, no matter the story. So it's helpful to understand that there's consequences. If you're depressed, it's going to impact your kids. If you have severe anxiety and you can't play with your kids, it's going to impact them. There's consequences that have a ripple effect here. So in that regard, if you're working with a family member and you want to help them, you want to come with an art of showing them the negative consequences. For some reason, either I'm distracted or I'm like, this is so complex, how am I going to shorten this and figure out how to get it to you? So bear with me while we go here. Okay, so the negative consequences versus the positives. And really the only difference why we do the good things that come from your addiction or your behaviors and the negatives is so that we can like tilt the decisional balance of what they're going to do, is what we call it. And so if the negatives are so heavy and so severe in their mind, then the positives become less fantastic. They might actually want to get help. Doesn't mean they can be free and clear of addiction anymore. It just means that they want to work toward it. That's what you're looking for, because if they want it themselves, you have a lot to work with. If you're dealing with somebody that could care less what you're saying, you can beat your head against the wall all day long and it's just not going to matter, and some of you may know that. But if they want it, they see it, then we can come alongside them with a lot of different tools. So in communication, whether you're casually saying it or you're saying, I'm going to give you some examples. If I said, well, why do you want to, I'm trying to get out of counselor mode and into regular people mode of what kind of conversation you might have. But if you want anything you say, instead of saying it, ask a question. So, well, has there anything bad happened since you've been drinking so much? And you almost go on the other side where you're saying, I mean, everybody drinks. Is it really that bad? I'm going to go extreme, so go with me here. Is there anything that bad about drinking? I mean, is there any negative consequences that have come? No negative consequences. Wait a minute, didn't you say that you got a DUI? Oh, yeah. Oh, how much did that cost you? Oh, $4,000. Wow. I mean, that's significant to me. Maybe you're rich. I don't know. And then in your conversation, you're identifying the consequences and trying to bring it to their awareness. It is confrontation. But instead of coming directly to say, you want me to list your negatives for you? I'll do that right now. And then they're tuned out half a second when your finger went up. But you say, well, let me ask you a question. And you asking them to give you information, you say, that's strange. I thought you said there was no negative consequences, but it seems like your wife is really seriously thinking about leaving you. Is that okay? I mean, is that all right? That's not really a consequence to you, or do you see that as a consequence? And so they know all of this, but they might not be thinking about it. So you're going to bring it to their awareness. And you go, oh yeah, I mean, yes, I want my wife, I don't know, and they're going to start wrestling. You're trying to bring into their awareness the negative things. They want to go to a college, and that's where it's hard if there's nothing there to work with. But let's say they want to go to a college, they want a certain type of job. Well, you have any worries that some of this would get in the way? Do you know anything about it? Do they do tests to see if you're on drugs before you can get that job? You're looking for ways to increase the negatives that are coming to them because of these addictions. Here's your gold nugget. Never take away a consequence from the person. Never take away a consequence. That's your only hope. If they don't have the negatives coming to them, they'll stay in that addiction forever. If you come in and you're brave, and I don't judge a parent on one side or the other because I don't know if I could kick the kid out, and I don't know if I could keep them. I don't know. But if they are supposed to go to jail and the parent jumps in and tries to make it to where they're not going to jail, if they're supposed to lose their license, if they're supposed to, pay $10,000. Whatever it is, if a person comes and takes that consequence away from them, they're that much farther from ever feeling the consequence and wanting to do something about it. So if there's anything you do, don't take away the consequence or protect the person from the consequence of their behavior. Now you have to use your wisdom in that, because there still may be a time to do it. And you remember my words and you say, no, not this time. So that's up to you and your relationship with that person. But it will drag it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Boundaries. Same type of thing. That's the consequences. You're putting up the boundaries and you're not moving from them. And that person will hate it and love it. Especially mental health. Somebody's depressed, somebody's schizophrenia, bipolar. If you set up the boundaries, at first it's going to be uncomfortable because they might not be able to put the boundaries there themselves. But just like a kid that will hate it and go against that boundary, but then eventually love it, it is security, and it tells them something they might not see naturally. They see it, and there can be a safety there. So having boundaries. This is my house. These are my rules. You can follow them or not. That's hard, but could be very valuable and could be refreshing. Boundaries like, here's my physical space. You cannot cross. Whatever the boundary may be, that you set it in place and that you don't back down from it. As soon as you back down from it, it becomes a cycle of them trying to manipulate on how to get you to back down from your boundary. If you're consistent, that will protect you. And self-care. You may be exhausted. In all your efforts to do whatever you can, you're having your good boundaries and you're doing what you need to do, you just may be exhausted anyways. So what do you do to feel refreshed? And in context, say this is a kid, how's your marriage? It's easy for one kid to take the distraction of everything else. Don't let it, because you want to be strong and healthy in who you are, your relationship with God. Then you want your spouse, your relationship with your spouse strong. That's going to be a foundational point to help with everything else. So make sure that whatever could build health in you is a priority. So you're strong and you're ready for the war. You're going to go in again. If this person is somebody you care about, you're not giving up. Whether you have boundaries or not, you're going to be in it. You're going to be in it for the long haul. So stay refreshed, stay encouraged, have a support group of some sort that can pour into you the hope that's there, the power of God that can be there. He can heal anybody. I see that sometimes He does not. That addiction could be a moment gone by God if He wants to, and I've seen it. I've also seen people struggle the whole life. And I use Paul because whatever his thorn was, he begged God to take it away, and God did not. So there's times that we have to struggle, and we can't just give up. We have to keep struggling and being in this war. So self-care. I'm going to see how far we go here with time. So just so you know, to keep the compassion, typically addiction is from somewhere. Okay? So a lot of times there's a family history of addiction. A lot of times there's very difficult emotions involved. A lot of times there's past childhood abuse. Okay? Past childhood abuse and ADHD that was never addressed. I don't even know if I believe in ADHD. I'm a psychologist, so of course I do to some extent. But as far as how we deal with it in our society, but there's an aspect that there's some connection, that intensity as a kid. If they don't figure out really creative ways, and that's being addressed upstairs, creative ways to put that energy somewhere, in order to function in life, they may turn to drugs to bring themselves to normal, like everyone else. That they have an underactive brain that needs stimulating, and they can't get it out of a regular life, so they may turn to drugs. And then, if somebody's gone through past trauma, there's a lot of strong emotions that are there, they could just make disappear in a moment with drugs and alcohol. And same thing as far as what causes mental health. There's a debate on that, but there's a lot of connection to past childhood trauma to future struggles with mental health. And then the current life stressor is everything was fine because everything was fine, but then I lost somebody I care about, or I had a trauma of my own in my adult life, and it's too much for me, so I'm going to break. I'm going to turn to using drugs. I'm going to have a psychotic break. There's a point where some of the problems are later when the stress is so great you can't handle it, and you break. So a preemptive attack is your coping skills. How do you deal with life? If you are strong in your walk with God and you have an ability to deal with stress, then that's going to protect you from future addictions or from having some kind of mental health problem that's hard to come back from. So you can both love the person and protect yourselves and others. You can have boundaries and have those stay and love the person. You do not have to just say, never mind with all my boundaries. They have to go out the door to love them. You can love them and say, when you get it together, I will be right here. That's important to know because we tend to go in extremes. Okay? Never do more than the person's doing. If you want to help someone, whether they're stuck in a violent relationship or on some form of drug or alcohol or anything like that, never do more than they're doing. Sometimes we want to rescue and we put all this effort. Don't do more than them. You go a little and wait for them to come to you before you go farther. Or you will waste your energy because they are not ready. Don't rescue people from their consequences and keep your boundaries. Okay? Now to bring it in, because I want you to have these nuggets and we don't have a lot of time, but at the core, I do want you to remember that I come from the perspective we're in a spiritual war. So my number one always is, how are you with God? How is your family with God? And then, now what's left, and let's get some tools for that. So that's an important starting point, is wake up in the morning and go, I'm in a war. I'm going to prepare, because it's true. See? Told ya. Okay? I don't really give Satan credit for everything, but it's just funny. So questions, but we don't have too much time. But I want to answer questions and then be available though after if people have to go and you want to still ask questions. I'll do the best, but you could tell this is good info. But is it complex? We could go forever. We could do a whole degree program on it.
I just wanted to contradict you that on a first DUI, it is at an average of $10,000.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. All right. Very good. Yeah. I think I was talking about another state, some guy.
Long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. 10,000. So yeah, what 17-year-old has the 10,000? So what do the parents do? Yes.
So could you talk a little more on never do more than the person is doing?
Yes.
That blew over my head.
Sure, and this is a concept, so you may not grasp it, but a pattern I see. Let me go with me here in the air, okay? Is the drama triangle. In a family, there's a person tends to play the role of the rescuer. I'm going to rescue and protect and keep peace. And there's somebody that's a victim, that's always the victim in a situation, and there's somebody that's a perpetrator, the bad guy. Everybody blames for everything. These roles could vary, but picture, where are you? Are you always considered the bad guy, or are you the victim, or are you trying to rescue everybody? Okay? So the rescuer role, they tend to like pat themselves on the shoulder like, yeah, I'm the rescuer. But the message of the rescuer is, I'm strong, you're weak. Why don't you just stay weak and I'll rescue you? It's not a nice message. It's keeping that person weak by rescuing them. So in that regard, a rescuer role tends to be, I'll take care of that. You might rescue the teenager from the angry dad, like, oh, your dad's gonna be so, I won't tell him. I'm just gonna, and you might jump in and rescue. You might say, you know what, I'm gonna cover this bill, but you better not do this again. I'm gonna talk to the judge and see if I can get your sentence shortened. Whatever you're doing everywhere, you're trying to rescue and protect them from their negative consequences. Well, in that regard, let's say they said, oh, Dad, please, I'm really ready to change. I'm so ready. Please just do this for me, and I will never use again. So those promises come. So you're watching. You don't, if they say, this is silly, but let's just say they need $10,000, you're going to give them $10 and wait and see what happens to it. You know what I mean? You're not going to rescue them from everything. They're saying, I'm ready. This is it. I hit my rock bottom. I want to change. Today's the day. I'm never going to do this again. Okay, here's this. Teeny tiny. Wait. Let's see what happens. Don't give them everything. Okay, fine. Everything's good now. Come on in. Come on home. Everything's fine. You give a little and wait and see. Do they give a little? You give a little, do they give a little? If it's all or nothing, you'll lose. Because they get good at manipulating.
What advice would you give someone who, the negative consequences, say it's their husband, the negative consequences are going to affect her?
Yes. So it's complicated. There's no easy answer, but the truth stands. So this is a very difficult situation. This is why women stay in abusive relationships. And because, for example, one I'm thinking, where the guy's pretty bad to her, but not to the kids. But she's afraid if she leaves, then the kids will be alone with him because they'll give split custody. And so she just figures, hey, I'll stay in a terrible relationship because at least I can watch my kids. So the motives are good to protect her and the kids. Say, this person's doing all this behavior that's going to head to losing a house, terrible credit, all of this stuff. That's the consequences of it. This person who has kids and is trying to deal with life may lose. It still stands, and so it's very complicated and you have to be wise, but I still say it stays. For example, just one quick example, that person can get a separation only of finances. And sometimes as Christians we think you got to get a divorce and that's against scripture, or stay forever and deal with it all. Well, if they got a separation in finances to where his liability of finance is separate than hers in paper and law, then that could protect her and her finances. And that's one example, but there's things like that we don't think about that may be more answers to it than what first comes to mind. But it still stands that if you aren't able to hold that boundary, the long-term negative effects will be there and it will just drag out for a long time. But I don't pretend to say that it's easy at all. It's going to be very difficult. But if they're protected from their consequences, it's just dragging out.
What about the person, I'm just thinking of someone specific that I know. I don't know if anyone else knows people in this situation, but someone who the person hasn't fully come to admitting that they have a problem. So they're in a cycle where for months they'll do better and then this bad thing will happen and then for months they'll do better. So they haven't realized they're in a cycle yet.
So there's two things in the creative way of showing them the negative consequences and making them seem real. Yeah, so you're bringing those negatives to their mind more often in a curious way, and it's hard to give specific examples in this regard, but you're watching for opportunities to point all the attention to their negative consequences so that it's in their mind more often how bad this is for them. But the bottom line is the idea of a rock bottom is real, in my opinion, is that there's a time when somebody's ready and there's a time when they're not. And other than this avenue of trying to show those negative consequences, there's not much you're going to do until they see it for themselves. And so that's the boundary and taking the responsibility off your shoulders. But very specifically pointing and accenting the negatives that are coming to them could be a way to increase their motivation to recognize they have a problem and they want to get help. Yes?
So how does this apply, or does this apply to a mental illness? So I know somebody who has bipolar, and she isn't interested in taking her medication because she thinks that's defeat. She's a Christian.
Yes.
And then I think her whole family doesn't really want to understand it or deal with it. I mean, it's easy for me to say on the outside. I can't imagine what they're going through. And part of me wants to shake her and say, don't you see what's going on? You got to take your medication. I want to tell the husband, you got to make sure she should take her medication. But I have no idea what you should or should not do.
Yep. So in that regard too, it's hard to be on the outside, but one thing is medication could help and maybe other things could too. So showing the negative consequences to get them into somebody that could help. So we do have Christian counselors. You have some up there that are just amazing. And if they don't want to take medication, there may be other ways besides medication that still manage bipolar. And basically short is put the box for the person and talk them into staying inside it. So that there could be behavioral strategies you get them from not doing the behaviors, that are extreme. And medication might be able to help that, but there's other things. So more focused on getting them to be open to the idea of bringing another person into their life, a Christian who has that same worldview, but who has options for this. And that person could say, come on now, you need to be on your medication, and it's their job to know how to do that. Or that person could say, okay, I understand it. You don't want to be on medication? Let's look at other options. And they can team up with that person in a strategic way to get them help. So bipolar is a little different than others where good luck with that. I mean, I don't even like medication in many ways, and it's hard sometimes with that particular disorder that it's two different people. A person that can manage fine in life, and then a person that's just causing so much chaos and damage. And it usually you watch on medication and off medication, unfortunately. But I understand that struggle with medication, but it's chemical. You can't deny that. It's just, whether you still want to be on a medication for it or not, but very much a biological based disorder. Okay? So otherwise, encouraging them, being support, stuff like that, because they're going to go through a lot of difficulty. And sometimes, even with that, a mom that has a disorder can tend to still see this is affecting her kids negatively, and she might have medication out of that. When I've told parents that chronic stress will cause problems in brain development in their kids, they stop screaming at each other. They didn't know that. So information like that can wake somebody up to where they stop something because they recognize the consequence. And they might not care about the damage to themselves, they care about the damage to their kids. Yeah. Yep. So increasing the amount of information you have to show the negatives would be a good idea. Okay? For time's sake, we've got to stop, but I'm open to, other than I need air conditioning or breeze. I keep turning it on everywhere, I'm like dying, melting over here. So other than that, I can stick around and answer questions and try to come up with this one out of